Hey there, folks. It's Scott once again, and welcome to another review. And this time I'm going to be reviewing the very well-known action American classic, First Blood. The film stars Sylvester Stallone. Not only is he the star of the film, he also had involvement in the screenplay. He technically rewrote the original draft, which was two screenwriters, and I'll get to the cast and crew shortly here, or crew and cast. The film was directed by Ted Kotcheff. The film was produced by Buzz Vedashans. The original two screenwriters for this film was Michael Cozzolo, Cozzole, I guess Cozzole, William Sackheim, and they originally based their versions of the screenplay on the novel by David Morrell, which is the same title, First Blood. It's completely different, but I'll get to that when I later in the review. The film also stars Richard Crenna as Colonel Troutman, probably his best well-known role of his career. You also have Brian Dennehy, he's been in several films that I liked him in. You also have a couple of other upcoming actors, and Chris Mulkey as Deputy Ward. He's appeared in films like next year he did Runaway, which I kind of like, with Tom Selleck. And he was also in another film I liked too called Ghost in the Machine. Which had Karen Allen. Sorry, not Karen Russell. Sorry about that. Then you have David Caruso, he would go on to be some well-known TV shows like NYPD Blue, I believe in the first 2-3 seasons, and then he would go on to be on the well-known CSI Miami show. And he's been in a few other films like I think, what was it called? He was in one film with Nicolas Cage. I can't remember what it was called. Jade, I think it was called. I can't remember. Anyways, back on the subject. Looking back, since this film's like 37 years old, it still holds up very well. I still enjoy it to this day. I forgot to mention some of the other crew. You had music by Jerry Goldsmith. In this film, Jerry Goldsmith's score really enhances the film. His themes are really prominent and adds some emotional depth to this movie. So it's good that his main themes for these films are definitely the most memorable, especially for the first three. And the cinematography was done by Andrew Lazzalo. It was edited by John Chapman. Production company was Basis Investments. And the film came out in '82, distributed by Orion Pictures apparently. I believe someone else took over for the sequels. Anyway, the budget was like $15 million, made $125 million. I don't know if it's worldwide or domestically, but anyways, it was a bona fide hit for Stallone, and it really showcased his acting. Besides he can do stuff besides Rocky or just straightforward action. This is it does have action, but it's something more. But I'll get to the plot, which I'll try to talk about briefly. Basically, you have this character named John Rambo, who is this former Vietnam War veteran, just traveling by foot, trying to get in touch with an old friend, and only to find out that unfortunately his friend died from cancer due to the Agent Orange. He's talking with his family. I don't know if it's his wife or his mother. It's not really clear on that, but anyway, slice it. He finds out sadly that his friend has died, and apparently, I think that was his only friend that he had left, because after he walks off after finding out the news, he throws his notepad away, and then he continues on foot, wandering into a small town in Hope, Washington, and apparently he comes into contact with the town's sheriff, Will Teasel, who considers Rambo to be an unwanted nuisance, and he does drive Rambo, but he's trying to drive him out of town, tell him not to come back, and they don't want guys like him, and he's basically the muscle in this town. And after he drops him off, of course Rambo refuses to go through that ruling, and then Teasel happens to notice in his driver's side mirror that he's starting to head back, and eventually Teasel arrests him, charges on vagrancy, resisting arrest, and possessing that concealed weapon, which is a knife. Then when he gets into the police station, he has trouble trying to follow orders, trying to get fingerprinted, and basically the Teasel's officers, especially this one character, which is Art Gout, and that's played by Jack Starrett. basically him and his men try to abuse him when they try to try to shower him, and when they try to shave him. Um, it triggers flashbacks of the torture he endured in POW as a POW in Vietnam, and he's able to physically overwhelm the patrolman. He rains his knife and fights his way outside. He steals a motorcycle in the process and flees in the woods. And Teasel organized the search party with as much of his men as he can, like with automatic weapons, dogs, and a helicopter. And then Gaut himself, actually attempts to shoot Rambo, despite Teasel saying not to do that. But apparently, he doesn't listen, and he ends up getting killed whenever Rambo is able to throw a rock at the helicopter's windshield, and the pilot's sudden reaction causes Gaut, who has removed his safety harness, to fall pretty much to his death and plunge into the jagged rocks far below. And Rambo actually tries to surrender himself, despite enduring this post-traumatic stress disorder that he has. But unfortunately, the officers open fire and don't believe him. And then apparently they learn more about Rambo, who's actually a former Green Beret who also received the Medal of Honor, but none of that impresses Tissot, and he refuses to hand over the manhunt for Rambo to the state police. And then whenever Tissot's man tries to attempt to capture him, Rambo's actually able to set up these booby traps and uses his bare hands to kind of stab. I think he pretty much stabs all of Tissot's men until he actually spares Tissot, and actually even holds him at knife point. He could have killed them, but he says he could have killed them all, but he didn't, and he threatens to fight back with greater force if Tissot does not let it go. And eventually, the state police and National Guard are called in to assist, and this also brings in a former mentor of his, which is Colonel Troutman's character, Richard Crenna's character, and he basically confirms that he's not just a Green Beret, but he's actually an expert at guerrilla warfare and survival. And we kind of see how he goes through how he's able to set up those traps. He even kills a deer, and he's able to physically carry it, just to show how much training he has endured, and shows how much of a badass motherfucker that Rambo is. And he even tries to advise Cecil to allow Rambo to surrender, or allows Troutman wants Rambo to be allowed to slip through the perimeter and escape into the next town, thereby diffusing the situation, and maybe he can be permitted to surrender peacefully, and confident that that Rambo is outnumbered. But fortunately, Tissot refuses, and even then, despite all that, Tissot allows his Troutman to contact Rambo, and he does try to persuade him to surrender peacefully, but Rambo refuses to give up, and condemning Tissot and his deputies for their abuse, and noting the words, "They drew first blood, not me." And then eventually, he's trying to escape through the woods, which is where he's been through for most of the movie, and he even refuses to kill a boy or harm him. Now in the novel, it's completely different. He actually murders the boy, but I'll get to the differences in that novel. Then apparently the National Guard, they actually corner Rambo eventually at the abandoned mine. Against orders, they pretty much use a rocket to collapse the entire mine, to collapse the entire entrance of the mine, actually specifically, but seemingly killing Rambo. But it's revealed that he survived. He was able to find a way out of there, and eventually he's able to hijack a supply truck carrying M60 machine guns and any kind of ammunition that's returning to town. And he ends up back into the same town of Hope, where he actually is able to distract pursuers, like he blows up the gas station. And he actually gets some. He's able to somehow shoot out the town's power. He's able to destroy a gun store near the police station. And Troutman, knowing that the sheriff is definitely no match for Rambo. He actually tries to convince Teasel to just uh, let the guard and state police handle it once again, but Teasel refuses to escape and then ignores Troutman's warnings basically. And then Rambo actually eventually spots Teasel on the police station of the roof, and actually engage in a brief gunfight. But somehow Rambo is able to know where Tiesel's at and actually shoots up where Tiesel's walking on the roof, and Tiesel's shot and he falls through the skylight. And then right when Rambo prepares to kill him, Troutman appears and tries to warn Rambo that if he will be definitely killed if he does not surrender, and reminding him of that he is definitely the last survivor of the elite unit of Green Berets. And Rambo is furious and upset, but he ends up collapsing in tears and talks about his experience in Vietnam, his friends dying, and the fact that he can't hold a job while he was able to run down $1 million equipment, and he's struggling in life. And he shares an embrace with not an embrace, but he kind of holds Cecil's hand, as showing that he's been through a lot. And eventually, as a result, Teasel is transported to the hospital while Rambo and Troutman walk out of the station, and of course Rambo's handcuffed and taken into custody, and that's how it ends. So anyways, as a result, from what I understood, the film differs greatly from the novel. Like I said before, I believe John Rambo specifically, was a far more vicious and psychotic killer. He killed a lot of people. Like I mentioned, he actually even killed the boy in the novel. But like I said before, Stallone decided to change the whole concept of the screenplay to make Rambo a little more empathetic and sympathetic, and kind of portrayed as kind of a victim of sorts of abuse and of abusive authority by the police officials, which I thought was kind of a wise move in a sense, because I think it might have taken away the sympathy of the character itself. And so before then, Stallone did films like he was known for the Rocky films. He did a film in '81, which I have yet to see, which actually has Rutger Hauer in it, called, gosh, I can't even remember it now. It sucks. Hold on, let me go look at it. It came out in '81, had Rutger Hauer in it. Let me go find it. Gosh. Nighthawks. And this was his, Rocky was, kind of as a boxing drama, but it was kind of a fantasy. It was a, going the distance type of film. But this one was a little more realistic and more grounded, and this really showcased the ability of Stallone's acting, like especially when he's talking with Troutman and his troubles, and and losing friends in the war, and just how he felt alone in this world and how he doesn't know what to do in this life, and that makes Rambo a far more empathetic character that you can live with. And Stallone does fine in this role, and he really showcased his acting ability. And Richard Crenna does a good job as Colonel Samuel Troutman. And originally Kirk Douglas was up for the role, but apparently he had a disagreement of how the screenplay was written, or how it didn't follow closely to the novel. I can't remember, and there was another actor up for the part, but he had heart surgery or something like that. So yeah, but Richard Crenna does fine in this role. I don't know if I could have imagined anyone else in this role but him. So it really showcased those two actors, and Brian Dennehy did a pretty good job of playing the asshole Teasel, which is he always thinks that since he's a high-ranking police officer, he thinks he's above the law. He thinks he's pretty much the mayor of the town. So he does a good job of playing a pretty complicated kind of villain, even though he has some humane moments where he actually, tries to understand what Troutman's going through and whatnot. Anyways, what was I going to say? Gosh, no, I'm sorry. But anyways, Brian Dennehy did a fine job. Apparently, I was going to say, yeah, in the novel, he's actually a little bit of a better character in the novel, which actually gives him reason why he has to take out Rambo, because Rambo in the book is a far more vicious and psychotic killer. So yeah, but Brian Dennehy did a good job of playing the kind of asshole sheriff, if you will. And I'm trying to think. I really can't think of any flaws in this film. I think it goes about at a good pace. Originally, from what I read, this film was like over 3 hours long, and to be honest, even Stallone attempted to buy the film out, thinking it was going to be a career killer, but with a lot of re-editing and just making sure that the scenes flow together and making sure everything was tightly paced. It ended up doing well, and it would spawn 4 sequels. So any way you slice it, Stallone did a great job. I like how it had some memorable lines. It has some good lines of dialogue. He's like, "Don't push it, or I'll give you a war you won't believe." Or the part where Troutman is practically, telling Rambo he needs to stop, or he will, if he doesn't surrender, he will definitely die and be killed in that Medal of Honor, and the fact he got a, Medal of Honor is not going to mean anything if you go out like this. And he's like, he basically tells Rambo it's over, and he's like, no, it's not over. You'll just turn it off. And then he tells how he lost a friend, and how he has this where he's at this bar, and I guess it's in a different country, and this kid comes up and asks him to shine his shoebox, and the guy says no, and Rambo mentions he goes up to get a couple beers, and apparently the kid removes the shoebox, and apparently it's a bomb and stuff like that. And Rambo's upset and crying how he lost his friend, where basically his friend's parts and everything was blood was everywhere on him. It's just pretty horrific description and what he went through during the war, because he had a good sense of brotherhood with his friends, and he tried to reconnect with a friend that ended up apparently dying of cancer because of the stuff he inhaled or endured when he was in the war. So yeah, it's a character that you can really empathize with, and Stallone does fine, and he really showcased some good acting ability, and it's more grounded in its realism of how post-traumatic stress disorders really can affect people, especially when you're abusive, especially when you trigger certain events. They're into survival mode. They can't really rationalize at times. Maybe they can, but it's all about survival. It's either a do or die situation. And Rambo was basically defending himself against people that abused him, and he was going to fight to stay alive, and yet he was merciful, and it showed that he's despite all that, he's still a good character. He's still a relatable character that you can empathize with. And I don't really think I can really find any flaws in the film. Maybe it could have used a little bit more action looking back, because it does slow down, but I think it's necessary because it wants to establish the characters, and maybe not necessarily make Brian Dennehy to be a complete villain, but he still kind of abused his authority just because he didn't just because he was a Vietnam War veteran, it's just to show how much of an asshole he was, even though he did have maybe one redeeming moment where he shared a drink with Colonel Troutman. But other than that, I guess maybe they could have made him I wish they would have done something more with his character, and maybe he could have surrendered. Maybe they could have done something more with that, but they wanted to maintain that villain-like attitude with Teasel, and that's why he got what he deserved. I don't know if he's still alive, but he's being transported in the ambulance, so it's assumed he does, but it probably will be like a dark ending for him. So, but yeah, it has great moments of dialogue, great one-liners, good action sequences considering the budget was only $15 million. The sequels definitely got better action sequences, but I guess in a way they weren't quite as grounded and realistic like this film was, because I believe this was only because apparently in the novel, from what I understood, Colonel Troutman actually killed Rambo in that one, and they did actually film a suicide ending where Rambo actually kills himself, which thankfully they didn't use, because I would not have liked that ending, and we wouldn't have gotten those later sequels, which were definitely fun entertainment. But I think looking back, I'll probably discuss more of the flaws, but I feel like they're not quite as realistic. But this film showcased the ability of Stallone's acting, and it did. And a wonderful job that he did, and the supporting characters, they all did their parts very well, and this film is definitely worth watching. And if you haven't seen it, give this movie a watch. And if you have seen it, you don't own it, get it. First Blood is where it's at. It's definitely worth owning. I wonder if I keep kind of wondering myself if I want to buy the novel just to explore my curiosity for that novel. So, but anywho, I'm gonna probably wrap this up and do a review of the second one, Rambo First Blood Part 2, and so that one's gonna be a good one. So yeah, all right. Hopefully, folks who are new and who have currently still subbed, hopefully you like this review, and if you do, give it a thumbs up, and I'll definitely bring more reviews in the future, and we'll go from there. Alrighty, folks, I'll see you later. Later.